because it's been 6 years for those listening who may not be as familiar with your backstory. It's been 6 years since you climbed the flagpole in South Carolina and took down the Confederate flag. Now, this was after, of course, you had 9 Black people gunned down in a church in Charleston. Um, you know, I know I know you've been asked a lot about this before. Let me get a couple goofy ass questions about this out of the way first. I remember in gym class when we had to climb the rope. I'm that old, right? And I'm thinking, I'm like, I mean, did she have to practice before she did that? Like, what? Like, was that something, honestly, that you had to practice going up this flagpole to grab, this Confederate flag?
I did, yes. It was a Greenpeace activist who had
Mm.
experienced scaling trees, trained
Mm.
me over the course of like a day and a half on how to do it. It's funny that you mentioned the ropes though, because I had that in my gym class too. And it was like, that was like a big thing.
That was a struggle day for me.
Yes,
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 right.
that was a big thing.
Yeah, because you had to get to the top, in order to pass, if you will. And
Hmm.
so it took me a couple times. And the ropes, they burn, of course, it messing up your hands. And so it was like a whole exercise. So immediately, I didn't think that when I saw it first, but as I was prepping for this interview, I'm like, well, did she had to have practiced this.
Hmm.
So you went in, you set, this intention. As you're setting this intention to take down the Confederate flag, which of course eventually led to them finally,
Hmm.
sort of getting rid of it. What were some of the scenarios you were going through?
That time was like, things had been building to that moment, right? Because I mentioned, we had Trayvon, we had the attack on voting rights. In Charlotte, we had the case of Jonathan Farrell that same summer in 2013. We had Ferguson, Eric Garner, Freddie Gray, right? It was just back-to-back things. And then Walter Scott in April. And so then by the time we got to June and we had the situation at Emanuel AME, it was just so devastating. It felt not only the violence of it, but it really felt like a spiritual attack, right? For him to go into a prayer meeting, sit down at a table with people, and then shoot and kill people. And there were multiple layers of it for me personally. Obviously, my family was enslaved in South Carolina. I grew up, seeing that flag and, my grandmother talking about what it was like growing up in South Carolina. I had 1 degree of separation from many of the people who were killed at the church. My brother-in-law grew up with Clementa Pinckney. Like, he was the person everybody looked up to. And, you talk to people who knew him, everybody says the same thing. It was devastating because what happened there could have happened anywhere. I mean, every Black community you go into, people are having meetings at the church, and so there was this sense that there's no such thing as safety, right? Like, what does it mean to be safe? Silence doesn't keep us safe, right? Every week we're looking up and people are being killed for no reason. And now people have been killed for just being at a prayer meeting. And then I think the added layer of outrage for me was the fact that the focus was on the flag, right? That we're gonna have a national discussion over whether South Carolina should lower the Confederate flag. We're not talking about what are the circumstances that led a 20-year-old, white man to have so much racism that he's going to, commit an act like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about whether or not South Carolina can lower its flag because of a law that they wrote about a flag that they raised in the 60s, right? And so for me, it was about showing that kind of defiance against structural racism in that way. Like, we're not going to wait on the state of South Carolina to do the right thing, and we're not going to stand for this indignity, And then I think for me, on a deeply personal level, I also wanted to show that defiance because that was scary. I mean, that was terrifying. That's scary. But I didn't want to allow my own fear to conquer me. And so for me, it was like, if I had the opportunity to work with other people and take this flag down, that was a stand that I wanted to make too, for myself, to show that I wasn't going to allow this terrorism to, shut me down.
Outside of your organizing circles, who else did you share with that this was going to be your plan?
Oh, that was it. That was it. It was like 9 of us who came together the Tuesday before we took the flag down. So this all happened over like the course of a week, where we came together and made this plan. And that was the other thing that was intense about it, because I couldn't tell anyone, and I knew how dangerous it was. But that was something I had to come to terms with, myself, that I was going down here to do something, and there's the possibility I don't survive it. But I had made peace with that.
So going back through that day, how soon was it before the police came?
So we had a couple people out there pretending to be joggers and things so they could keep an eye out. The police were on patrol. And so they gave us the signal for when the police stepped away. And we practiced all of that. Like we practiced, the car would have to bring us up. And then James, he was the person that helped me over the fence. We walk over there, he helps me over the fence. And then we figured that if I could get maybe like 8 feet off the ground or so, it would be hard for them to grab me. And then I could maybe pause for a second and catch my breath if I needed to. So that was the plan. The fence actually ended up making it harder for them to reach me because they had built this like 4-foot tall spoked fence. So they couldn't just grab me. But I know it wasn't too long before they realized what was happening, because I don't think I was too far up before they started shouting at me to come down.
Because you're at the state house, correct?
Yes, the
Yeah,
state house in Columbia, South Carolina.
yeah. Now the young man who helped you over the fence, and also I believe was at the base of the flagpole
Mhm.
as you're climbing up to get this flag. He was white, correct?
Yes, James
Okay.
Tyson. Mhm.
And why was it important that that person be white?
Yeah, I mean, we thought through all of that. So I mean, the first thing was like, how do we get the flag down? Because they had designed it with the ropes on the inside of the pole. And so that's how it became like somebody probably has to climb to the top. And we were trying to figure out, well, who can do that? It has to be somebody who can get arrested, somebody who can train on how to do it. And that kind of narrowed it down among our group. And we thought it would be powerful for it to be a Black woman, for people to look up and see a Black woman taking the flag down, and the fact that I had this history. And so once it was clear that I was going to be doing that role, that's when we decided it should be James, like it should be a white man who helps me over the fence, for a number of reasons. One, because if somebody glances over there, they see James disguised as a construction worker, they're more likely to assume something, it's okay. I mean, let's be real. That's how structural racism operates, right? But then also symbolically to represent that like racial struggle, right? Like the nature of racial allyship, I guess, or being an accomplice, right, in the struggle against structural racism. So the climb itself kind of became symbolic of that historic struggle to dismantle racism. And then there was a point where the police were actually going to tase me when I was near the top getting ready to take the flag down. And that's why if you look at video, you might see James is holding onto the pole when I come back down. And that's because he was saying like, basically if you electrocute her, you'll have to electrocute me too. And people were standing around shouting, she's being nonviolent. Like, why are you escalating in this way? So it was both symbolic, but it was also a very real show of allyship.
Now because this flagpole is metal, so we're talking about electricity. So it's not dramatic, I don't think, to say that the police were willing to kill you over a flag.
Oh yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they certainly threatened it. They had 3 separate tasers trained on me at one point.
Mm. So I'm sure that's a scenario that ran through your mind going into it, that I might not survive this. How are you able to recognize something, or not recognize, reconcile something like that, that this act of civil disobedience, of resistance, may cost you your life?
I think for me, it was recognizing that I only have the level of freedom that I have because people took risks like that in the past. It made it real for me in a way that it had never been before. Like the fact that my great 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 grandmother was enslaved in South Carolina. And so according to the laws, that would have been my destiny. That's what I would have been born into. I would have been born into slavery had it not been for the struggles of people in past generations. I would still be living under Jim Crow had it not been for, I was the first generation in my family to attend integrated schools, My parents were born, the schools were still segregated. So it was that recognition. And then also, like I said before, people were getting killed for doing nothing, not because they were taking a stand, not because they were challenging anything, just because they happened to be in a position. Trayvon Martin was just walking home from the store, had gone to get soda and Skittles and walking home, and he gets killed. The people at Emanuel AME were just sitting in a church praying. There was just so much of that happening, and there is so much of that happening on a daily basis. Most of it doesn't make national news or get headlines. And so then it's like, what am I saving by not taking a stand? Am I really safer by not taking a stand? I'm not sure that I am. I mean, that was kind of the judgment that I was making in my mind.
When you're coming down from the flagpole, having accomplished the mission that you set out to do, what was going through your mind about what the aftermath of this might look like?
It's funny, like when I think back at that time, it was really difficult to see very far ahead. I think especially after I had kind of made peace with the risk that I was taking, I really wasn't thinking too far ahead, I'll be honest with you. So just getting the flag and coming back down was like, okay, a victory, we've accomplished this. And then they took us to the jail and they booked us. And in the jail, you can't really see what's going on. You have no real awareness of what's going on outside. They have TVs in there, but they don't play the news or anything like that. And so we only got a sense of what was going on because of what the guards were saying to us. They were like, what are y'all? Oh, y'all take the flag down? They were excited, like a lot of them supported what we had done. And so I didn't really know until I got released from jail how much of an impact, it had made, that it was like this major thing that was making waves. Cause the first word that we got was like, by the time we had gotten through booking, that they had raised the flag back up. So we were kind of like, well, at least the statement was made. We weren't sure, what level of impact it might've made or not at that point.
Well, and again, as we saw, the time period, I think, from when you did that to when they decided that, the Confederate flag was not to fly over, state buildings, it was maybe, 2 weeks?
About 2 weeks. Mm-hmm.
Imagine that. It took them decades. This was a debate. And so I think, one of the reasons why this was so symbolic is that we often hear about what's the better way, working from the inside or doing these acts of resistance. But this is why resistance is powerful, because there's some things you can certainly accomplish from working from the inside. But if we look at the history of the progress in this country, it's usually been by force of some kind. And so that was a different kind of force that was, applied there.